Have you ever visited a website that you felt was deceiving? No, that's the wrong question. How often do you visit a website that you think is deceptive? Whether it's a company making it virtually impossible to cancel their services or contact customer support, or something more subtle like a large accept button and a very tiny cancel button. These patterns, or these dark patterns, are seen all over the internet. In my opinion, there isn't a whole lot of scholarship in this area just yet, at least. Although in today's interview we discuss a paper that's pretty foundational in that way. What dark patterns exist and what can we learn from them? That's the topic of today's episode.
So, hello, I'm Kerstin Bongard-Blanchy. I'm research associate at the University of Luxembourg in the Human-Computer Interaction Group.
And could you tell us a little bit about the types of things you research?
Human-computer interaction is quite a broad field. So my research in particular focuses on manipulative interface designs. How can we help people detect them, protect them from them, and how do they perceive them? So it's quite complex, but it's not my only research field. I'm also working on a big project on collaboration technologies, where we try to see how technologies can help us enhance human-to-human collaboration.
When you say user interface designs, is it appropriate to assume that that means it's modern, that it's really a computer thing, or is there scholarship going back that you can rely on?
Well, traditionally, HCI is indeed a field that looks into humans and computers. But nowadays, we see more and more projects that have nothing to do with digital technologies. So, for example, we've had PhD candidates also working with digital museum collections, with others working with user experience regarding transport information. So they work, for example, for railway companies. So we also go into service design, which is less and less digital only, but where the whole service experience component becomes more and more important.
Could you give an example of what it means to be manipulated through design?
Manipulated basically means that we end up doing things that if we would have understood what's happening, we might have not done.
Could that be like, I know I've gone through a couple of websites where I'm going to make a purchase and I'm kind of surprised by I get to the end that there's a charge or something I didn't understand. Is
Yes.
that under the umbrella?
Yes, exactly. So a lot of people might have already ended up subscribed to Prime, or a big online seller service. Here we clearly see interface design patterns in play that really trick you into the subscription, whilst you had no intention to take it.
So there's a difference between being tricked into a subscription and, I don't know, like a mob boss saying he's going to break my knees if I don't give him money, which is very illegal. Where are the boundaries, or at least how deep does your work go?
Actually, the boundaries are one of the big questions in our work on the manipulative design sphere, because it's you find everything from really harmless, funny temptations or up to really mean patterns that, for example, hinder people to unscribe from a service that can have cause quite some harm to users. So you find them all, and that's also what makes the whole term dark patterns that's been used for such designs. It makes it very tricky because it's an umbrella term for things that are more or less legitimate, harmful, etc. And you cannot just draw a clear line. This is okay, this is not. So it's very, it's a gradient, I would say.
When you encounter a dark pattern, do you presume that the company or person who created the website, that it was engineered that way, or can these things happen by accident?
Both, I would say. So in many cases, it's probably done on purpose, and it's not always something you can blame a company for. I think every company has the right to try to get customers to buy their products. And
Sure, fair enough.
we cannot really say this is totally not acceptable that they're doing this. But still, some reflection should go into this. Is this still okay what we're doing, or are we maybe going a little too far here? And then I also think we often see copy-paste behavior. This and this famous site is doing it. We just do it the same way. And that's happening on the designer side. That's also happening on the development side. And we replicate patterns that we're used to seeing on new pages.
So how do you do data collection to study something like this?
Before us, we've seen quite some research already going into this, not very user-centered, but people have been scraping web pages, for example, and really trying to extract dark patterns on those pages. On our side, we were really sad that there was so little known about what's actually happening on the user side. So do users actually recognize these things? Are they influenced by them or not? And having done one big study on this, I can now say it's very difficult to study. And I don't want to discourage other researchers to do it, but it's really difficult to gather the data in a very realistic setup. And it needs to be very realistic, because when we encounter dark patterns, manipulative designs in our daily lives, that happens with a lot of other things happening around. So there's a lot of context that influences. Am I in a rush, or do I have time? Do I really need to get on this web page, or do I actually not care, so I can just go to another one? So this is some things that are very hard to simulate in a lab study. And that's a big challenge for people researching manipulative designs.
But you've got to start somewhere. What kind of, survey can you put together?
Yeah, basically what we tried, we didn't really study if it does actually influence people's choice and behavior. We only did the first step and seeing, okay, are people aware that this exists and this might influence them? So this you can actually do through a survey. Ask them to cite examples that come to their mind. And then in the second part, we only showed screenshots for a few seconds and asked people, so did you see anything that would potentially influence your behavior? And we analyzed if people actually could identify the design elements that are potentially manipulative. So that was a first glimpse into, okay, how far do people actually understand what's going on?
Yeah. Could we walk through maybe the panelist experience, what they're confronted with and what sort of choice they have to say in order for you to determine if they're aware of these patterns?
Yeah, we defined a whole list of possible good answers. We had 10 examples, of which one had no dark pattern. We also told people that not all examples would have dark patterns, because we didn't want people to really, really look for them, which you would do if you surf the internet. So, for example, okay, my first one. So this falls into the category confirm shaming. And we have a pop-up on a shopping page, and it asks users to proceed either to view the clothes. So you have a very big prominent button that says view clothes. And underneath, there's just a text with a hyperlink that says, no thanks, I like wearing lame clothes. So that's what we call confirm shaming. You kind of play with people's, how you say, pride and push them to go for the option that's better for the company. So here, did people actually understand that what are the two choices they have, and that the choice that is less interesting for the company is actually pretty much hidden and framed in a way that you don't want to click on it?
I was going to say, I noticed that in particular on a number of sites, but I also make websites, so maybe I'm hypersensitive to it. Do typical users notice these things?
Okay, what did we find? So we had 9 examples with dark patterns, and we started nearly 60% of the participants identified 5, 6, 7, 8, or all the 9. So it's more than we expected. So it's good news. A lot of patterns are identifiable once you know about them, or you take the time to look at what you're having in front of your eyes. So that was quite encouraging. But also you see big differences. So, for example, design patterns that use framing. We have one example about activating face recognition that only plays on language. It tells you what are the advantages of turning on face recognition and what are the disadvantages of not turning on face recognition. But it doesn't give you the opposite. What are the disadvantages of turning it on, and what are the advantages of not turning it on? So this is clearly very selected information that you're getting, and you have the impression you take a very informed decision, which is not at all the case. And that was very hard for people to see through. this technique.
So amongst the techniques, I guess I'm afraid I don't want to give out any secret hints to people who use these, but are some more popular or more effective than others?
Yeah, this is a big dilemma actually when you do this kind of research, right? You don't want to help the evil side to keep more evil. So we didn't study how people really behave. So I can't really say which one is more effective. That's good. So we avoid this trap.
I get you, yeah.
We only ask people which ones they think would influence them most. And it's not necessarily the ones that they don't see. So, for example, we have one pattern in there that's, we call this autoplay, and that obviously plays on your attention, on how much time you will stick on a streaming service. So one video just plays after another without any intervention on your side. This pattern was recognized by most participants, and most said it didn't bother them. So it's also a question of convenience. So some patterns might not have a very positive influence on our behavior, but we don't mind because actually we really want to binge watch. Or yes, so that's also where we come back to this gradient, where you cannot draw a clear line between what should be allowed and what should not be allowed. Yes.
It almost sounds unbelievable. First, 99% of stocks lost value in a single day. Now we're riding out the S&P 500's longest losing streak since the Great Recession. The only thing that seems to be impervious to inflation is Costco hot dogs. But let's get real, and I'll tell you about a platform that delivers exceptional returns, even during this year's record-setting losses. It's called Masterworks. Business Insider called them the go-to when it comes to art investing. In the Financial Times, they said Masterworks is the investment platform to watch. But let's talk actual results, because Masterworks just sold another painting in early November. That brings their last 3 sales to 17%, 21%, and 33% net returns, right to their investors. That's right, over 17% net returns even in 2022. When we first started talking about Masterworks, they had maybe a few thousand investors. Now there's over 560,000 members and $500 million invested. In fact, they've come a long way in a short time. They have a wait list to sign up right now. But you can skip it by using the promo code DataSkeptic at Masterworks.com. That's code DataSkeptic to skip the wait list at Masterworks.com. See important Regulation A disclosures at Masterworks.com/CD. So it seems like from the participants you had, definitely some awareness. Are they concerned about it?
So regarding concern, we actually had 3 questions. The first was about awareness. So are you actually aware that online interfaces can influence your choices and behavior? And here we saw that people were on the aware side, clearly. We got a significant result for people being aware of that influence on them, and even more on other people, because we asked for both. So do you think it can influence you? Do you think it can influence people in general? Then we ask about potential harm. And here it gets rather uncertain. So people are not really sure if that can be harmful to them. And that's true for them. And it's a little bit less true for if they think about people in general, but still it's not a clear-cut result. And worry, not really. So not much concern. It's between uncertain and not worried what we get. So most people are not worried for themselves. They are worried for other people or uncertain for other people, but we clearly see that there's a lack of awareness of what can actually happen after, or maybe it's not, they don't think it's such a big problem for their lives. This, I don't know.
When I look through the examples in the paper, and they're maybe smaller, I think, than the participants saw them, so maybe I'm missing something, but it doesn't look like there's anything illegal per se. It may be ethically questionable choices, but no laws, to my knowledge, being broken. Do you find, is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. We had one example that's bundled consent, where to share files through an online service, you had to agree on all the terms and conditions and the cookies. That's something that's illegal in Europe. And they also changed it in the meantime, the provider who had this page. So they are all actually taken from real web services. Nothing's made up there. We only made the design neutral so that nobody can say, hey, you're blaming us. But actually, we changed that website in the meantime. And there's this paper out still blaming us. So we went with more neutral images, but they're actually totally based on what was on real websites before.
Oh, that explains a lot. I was going to say you had a good graphic designer on the team because they all look really professional, but now I know why.
Yeah.
Although it's still a lot of work to keep that while stripping out brands and such, I'm sure.
Mhm. Yeah.
Were there any free text responses where you could get just sort of the general thoughts of users?
So when people said they thought they would be influenced, or they thought they might face potential harm, or they said they were worried. So let me cite some harms that
Yeah.
people really mention. What comes out the most is that people see how these design patterns can cause psychological harm. The second one that stood out was financial harm. So spending more than you actually intended. Some people also saw some cyber threat dangers for their privacy, but that was not so obvious for most people. And a few also mentioned the effect on society. So how can this cause damage to society? And I think a lot of people also had fake news in mind when they answered those questions. So that was not exactly the topic of this research, but it really came out in a lot of the free comments.
Sure. I mean, it was the topic du jour of the time, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we also saw that, of course, people are not so worried for themselves, but they really are for minors, for their children, and also for their parents or their elderly relatives. So there they clearly felt like these people are probably less prepared to resist these techniques.
Sure.
Yes.
Well, then it sounds like participants thought that they could give themselves a certain immunity. Do you find that that's the case, or could that just be a bit of arrogance, maybe?
I think it's wishful thinking. And that's also what people actually say at the end of the survey, because those questions were asked at the very beginning. And then they went through all the screenshots. They had to say, so this and I think this and this element is manipulative. And after the 10 examples, we gave them an explanation saying, okay, basically what they do on this side, for example, enhancing the option that's more profitable for them by making it big green buttons. So we explained all the techniques that were used. And then we asked them, do you think this is legitimate or not? Do you think you might be influenced by this or not? And at the very end, we just put a free feedback field. So basically, people could write whatever they want. Any thoughts on this? We got super long answers. Like, it was kind of mind blowing because on a platform like Prolific, people are paid for their time. So they didn't have to write anything there. And it seemed like people were shocked, like saying, I really thought I was so switched on and I didn't recognize this, or I did recognize it, but I also recognize that I always fall for it. So it was kind of a revelation for many of the participants to go through this exercise, actually.
Did you find that there were any differences you could measure across demographics? Are men more susceptible, anything like that?
Yes, in terms of demographics, we did indeed see that people from Generation Z and Y were better in recognizing dark patterns. So this is really depressing for me because I'm Gen X, but it's okay. I assume it. And we also saw that a higher level of education is, of course, helping people also to recognize dark patterns better, unfortunately.
So I know you have then some of the likelihoods that people are susceptible to these based on the regression you were able to do. Could we dig into some of
Mhm.
those results? What does the regression tell you?
We did not find any very strong result there. The only significant result was inverse correlation between participants' capability to detect dark patterns and their likelihood to be influenced. So that means people who recognize those manipulative designs more easily, they consider themselves also likely less influential. But the effect is very, very small. Otherwise, we did not see any strong correlation there that's how it goes in
Yeah,
research, right?
exactly. A pragmatic result.
Pragmatic, and was also surprising. We thought that patterns that people find highly influential, they would probably find highly illegitimate, like not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
But that was not at all the case. As I already said before, some patterns highly influential, but totally okay for a lot of users, and others much less influential, but not okay for most users.
Well, there was at least the one example you'd mentioned that has since changed their site because they were violating GDPR. So that's a change. But
Mhm.
I don't know that I would support a law about the size of buttons, that green buttons have to be below a certain, size. That seems a
Mhm.
bit much. Is there an action society should take here, or are we just stuck with a kind
Mhm.
of polluted dark pattern internet?
Yeah, that's a very tricky challenge. In Europe, we see a lot of tentatives to regulate this. So, for example, if you give two options, they should be presented equally. Now, do you really want to see two big green buttons? I'm not really sure about this. So, it's a really tricky thing to regulate in an intelligent manner. What we did at the end of the paper, we were really discussing, so what should actually be done? And we have some legal scholars on board in among the co-writers, but even these people were not convinced that regulation can really solve that issue. So some things you can regulate. You can say you cannot put everything behind a one green accept button and not give people the option to opt out, for example. So there's things you can regulate, mainly with regard to privacy choices. But there's also things you cannot, because you cannot regulate advertisement in supermarkets either. If there is one bottle left and you see there's one bottle left, is that manipulation? Yeah, of course, fear of missing out. But it's there, it's only one left. So if a hotel provider says there's only one room left, you can only regulate that this information should be true and not made up. But you should probably not say this should be illegal, because it's also used for information.
Sure.
So we always get this dilemma that some dark patterns are actually also providing a better user experience, which is really sad. So at the end, what we proposed was saying there should be a whole range of intervention spaces. We could work on the educational side, train people to recognize those, raise awareness. And I think this is happening quite a lot. There's blogs talking about this. You have Twitter handles on dark patterns. So people start to know this topic. We also think there's potential on the design side, train designers on the use of dark patterns. What are they? What to be more careful, give some design guidelines that might also help them guide their design process. I've been a UX designer as well, so I can totally relate how you also look at what others do and just adopt these techniques without too much asking, is that maybe manipulative what I'm doing here? And is this still okay? One of our PhDs is working on heuristics for designers that should help a little bit ask yourself, is what I'm doing manipulative or not? Then we also have people on the technical side that would really love to detect dark patterns as browser plugins. I've seen other papers coming out on this, so let's see, fingers crossed that this will somehow work. We know there's already some nice plugins that fill in the cookie banners in Europe for you. Maybe there's some hope that technology might help us a little bit with this. And then, of course, there's regulations that might also help us eliminate some of the dark patterns.
To what degree do you think regulation should play a role? I mean, we both agreed no restrictions on the size of the green button, but where can progress be made on that front?
We already have some, for example, privacy by design principles, so they can actually bring in principles, and they're also important for at least the few patterns that they can regulate. If they enforce this, that's very powerful. So often that's the problem. You make a rule, but you also need to enforce it. You need
Yeah.
the manpower to do this. But the few cases where this has been enforced have made a lot of companies re-reflect on their practices. So in this sense, regulation plays quite an important role. even if they will not fine everybody who infringes the rules. But if they fine the big players, that's having quite an effect. Otherwise, so somehow we put a lot of hope in them, but I think there's only that much they can do. Yes, educating people is also very important, and advertisement. I guess when advertisement came into this world, people also fell for it. I'm born in East Germany. I saw my first advertisement when I was 10 years old, and I can tell you everybody believed it was all true. So, and then we had to learn that actually no, this is advertisement and it's not magic, these products. And you learn and you adapt also with the world that changes around you.
Do you think that education needs to start in elementary school or high school, or where's the best place to get it going? Sorry, I use the American terms too. I don't know, but
No, it's fine. Well, my kids are in elementary school, but they know the research I'm doing. And so my son is pretty good in spotting dark patterns already. So I think even kids under 10 are able to recognize dark patterns. So maybe we should try to teach them.
maybe they should teach the older people.
Yeah, maybe. Yes, because I think my parents' generation is having a much harder time to resist.
Well, ultimately, all of these websites end up this way because some UX designer created them. Maybe they created them under the very specific guidance of the boss who wanted it exactly in the dark pattern format. Is there room, or do you have any tips for a UX designer who wants to push back a little bit or try and influence from within their role?
We've seen a lot of Medium posts of UX designers asking this question. So what can I do? And I think as an employer, you also have to make sure that people are comfortable with doing what they do. Otherwise, I guess they will quit the company at one point and find another employer who is more aligned with their values. So I don't think people should feel obliged to really do everything they're asked to do to get people to buy products or subscribe to something. But what is a little bit funny, I did workshops for designers because I really thought we really need to teach them and sensitize them on this problem. I did this in France, and by the end of that workshop, I had a manager coming to me and saying, actually, I have the opposite problem. My designers do not implement anything I ask them to. And sometimes we're just obliged, otherwise the company is going to close down. So these people are super ethical. They come with an education where this is the user interest is the center of what they are taught. And it's really hard as a person managing a company to get them to do something that's slightly against the user's interest. So I was super happy to learn about this. I was like, great, these people don't need me. But at the same time, I could feel the pain of this manager as well, thinking, okay, well, we have a really tricky challenge here. So where do you draw the line? But I think it's also when you choose for whom you work, this is when you also choose what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. And if you find the right company, I assume they would also be willing to listen to your advice. Yeah.
Well, many people working on whether they're a data scientist or doing something like that will get into a spot where maybe there's some web page that want to get signups going, and you're going to look at the data. And perhaps we change the text or the picture or the color, try and get more signups. That's the process of business, right? You want signups for whatever the signup is.
Yeah.
Um, it can be easy to maybe fall into a dark pattern because the numbers tell you you're going in the right direction. Hiding the second option is going to make some people pick the first option.
Mm-hmm.
It can be kind of insidious in that regard if you only look at the spreadsheet and not the actual interface. Are there any best practices you think, especially data-minded people, should be following?
Wow. So now you're touching a very, very big problem, because I don't know to what extent data scientists are actually trained in ethics. So I moved away from training the designers, and now this is my focus in my computer science bachelor courses. And I was very shocked that by the 6th semester, that was the first time they've ever heard about ethics. I think we have a lot of work there to do to train these people that think they only handle numbers, but numbers that will actually impact people, to know about ethics and to know how to make decisions there.
And in terms of that curve, I would agree. Like, I think maybe in grad school, it was until I got my first computer ethics course of any kind. What would you like curriculum to look like in the future?
Well, I would have expected this to arrive in the first semester, not as a full-fledged course, but that's something, whatever you teach, that might potentially have an influence on a person or a being
Sure.
or the earth down the road. That should be a consideration. So not necessarily say, hey, this is ethics, this is how it works, but more like, okay, now we're doing this. What are the externalities of actually doing this? So having people reflect beyond the task at hand, but really thinking about who are actually the stakeholders and the people influenced by what I'm doing.
Yeah. I could put myself in the shoes of like a chemist or a physician, and if they make a mistake, many people can die. If I make a mistake doing a website that sells T-shirts, maybe I hurt my employer. It always feels like maybe ethics aren't as critical. Do you have maybe a concise way to help people appreciate that it really belongs a little earlier on in your training?
Well, on the one hand, we are happy because we can say, wow, even if something goes wrong in our research, nobody's going to die. Right. So it's kind of a luxury. But at the same time, like researching dark patterns, there's also days when I'm like, does it really matter? People don't care. People give away all their data to have a free email account.
Yeah.
Me too. And actually, I don't know myself what harm I'm exposing myself to. It's very abstract. It's somewhere in the future. Very hard to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do we measure the harm? I think as long as you don't feel it or somebody around you feels it, it's very hard to really say this is a super, super relevant topic. And at the same time, if you think of people who do not have, for example, huge financial means and they get trapped into gambling websites, then this is really terrible. And that can actually be life-threatening. It's definitely diminishing the life quality. It can hurt families. So it's not totally innocent either.
And I think a lot of these dark patterns are the front door for a fraudulent scheme. They don't have to be, but often they're there, I think.
And also time-wise, okay, you can say you decide that you want to binge watch or you want an infinite scroll on your social media account. But if you really think about how people spend their time and how they maybe would like to spend their time, then there's probably also a big gap. And this is definitely having an impact on society. So it's not harmless.
Well, you'd mentioned this study is still very new, but 2 years ago, time flies in the modern era. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've been up to before and since?
This study was the starter to get into a funded project. So we ran this study and then we drafted a project proposal for which we obtained the funding. And we hired a postdoc and a PhD and we got another funding. So now we have a whole team of people researching dark patterns, which is fantastic. And we've been really trying to stick to this user perspective on the one hand. So we've had one study looking into scarcity cues and seeing if they really influence behavior. I can't tell you the paper yet because it's still under submission, but I hope it's going to work soon. We also have some study ideas for confirm shaming that are going on at the moment. And one of my PhDs has been really looking into the designers' roles and designers' ethics and trying to draft the heuristics for manipulative designs that I already talked about.
Well, very neat. I definitely want to follow up as those papers come out. And where can listeners learn more about yourself and the whole team and what you guys are up to?
So yes, you can find us under hci.uni.lu.
Great. Well, I have a link in the show notes for listeners to find it too. Kerstin, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your work.
That was a pleasure.
Well, that's it for this installment of Data Skeptic Ad Tech. Here's a quick preview of what I got for you coming up next.
If we're two organizations, instead of one of us sharing our data with the other, We would both agree to the computation using cleanroom infrastructure. That computation would run on these shared data sets, produce the outputs, and then make them available to either one or both of us, depending on what we've agreed to in code.
That's next time on Data Skeptic Ad Tech.